Everyone for joining us today. Looks like we're doing pretty good. To get things started off, I'm going to give a brief opening. My name is Molly Sarver. I work for the Indiana County Office of Planning and Development, and I act as Sustainability Coordinator to the Sustainable Economic Development Task Force. Today we have with us Kevin Yoder from the Nature Conservancy. He's going to be talking to us about the Family Forest Carbon program. So to get things started off, just to let you know a little bit about the task force, we were started back in April of 2017 with the Sustainable Economy Summit, which was held by the Indiana County Commissioners. County commissioners at that time were Rod Ruddick, Michael Baker, and Shireen Hess. Once the task force was established, they began working on developing a sustainable economic development report to identify areas of opportunity for sustainable development in Indiana County. They identified 4 focus groups: sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, building construction and materials, and environmental restoration and stewardship. These are the inspiration for the themes of our weeks for this sustainable webinar series. This first week being Environmental Restoration and Stewardship Week. Within these 4 focuses, they look for opportunities for economic development, workforce development, and citizen education on sustainability issues. And to develop the report, they reached out to the community and they had multiple meetings for various stakeholders to come forward and share their opinions, their insight, and their concerns for the community. In addition to some recommended action items, 5 different executive recommendations were made, that being to start a new mission for the task force, meaning to continue their work rather than just stop with the finalization of the report. Develop an office of sustainability, which they don't have an official office of sustainability for the county, but as a staff person, I work for the task force, so we're making progress there. They want to continue holding annual sustainable economic summits. We've held them in 2017, 2018, 2019. Unfortunately, we were not able to hold one last year due to the pandemic, but that was the inspiration for this webinar series to continue doing the summits. They wanted to incorporate more sustainability into long-range planning for the county. And finally, they wanted to pursue expanding broadband access in the county, which I think is very relevant to our current circumstances. So the report was unveiled in September of 2018, and we started bringing in even more speakers, making more connections, and just building our capacity as a task force. We had a lot of other reports published, like Local Foods, Local Places, and there was a lot of different community efforts that happened in 2019 going forward. And there's a lot of efforts that are continuing on, even though things are a little bit more difficult to do now that we're not in person. If anyone's interested in getting more involved in the task force, they can reach out to our Gmail account, which is sustainableindianacounty@gmail.com, or they can go to our website, sustainableindianacounty.org. All of the webinars that we're holding for this series are going to be recorded and posted to the website after they've been edited. You can also access these recordings on our Facebook, because all of our webinars are live streamed on Facebook, and the live stream should stay up there once we've shut things down. So without further ado, I will pass things off to Kevin Yoder. We are having some internet difficulties, so just hang in there with us and we'll work through it. All right, thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you, Molly, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. My name is Kevin Yoder. I'm a conservation forester for the Nature Conservancy, and so across my career, I've really worked with private landowners to help them manage their forest and meet their management goals, whatever that might be. Could that be timber production, wildlife habitat, recreation, and something that's becoming more and more interest to landowners and then also on the national scale is carbon management and forest carbon management. And how do forests play a role in climate change and mitigating global warming impacts? And so that's becoming an increasing part of my work. And in particular, this Family Forest Carbon Program, which is a new program being launched in Pennsylvania, and I think is a really good opportunity for landowners. And so I'll go through that. As Molly mentioned, unfortunately, I do not have the good broadband where I'm at. So internet is my internet's lagging a little bit here. So the PowerPoint might be delayed a little bit. I'm also going to drop off video while going on over the presentation. Then I'll come back on during follow-up Q&A. So please just bear with me, and I apologize in advance for any technical difficulties.
Thank you, Kevin. And before you continue, I also want to mention that once we end the webinar, this webinar will automatically connect people to a survey we have where people will have the opportunity to tell us, how we did, what things they'd like us to improve, what other topics they are interested in, and just general feedback, which is really helpful to us in improving our webinars going forward. So if at the end of the webinar, everyone can stay on to fill out that survey, or if you don't have time to finish it immediately after this webinar, we do have a link to it on our website. So thank you, Kevin. I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Molly. So I'm going to kick off the conversation just talking about forest carbon management and a little bit of science behind forestry and how it interrelates with carbon management and climate change. So forests are a great way at mitigating climate change through photosynthesis. So a tree, as it is conducting photosynthesis, it's actually taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then part of that gets stored in the tree, in the roots, in the leaves, and so there's two modes of activity here. There's carbon sequestration, where there's the active removal of carbon dioxide, but then there's also carbon storage. So the tree itself is storing carbon, or many of us are probably sitting at a wooden desk or a wooden table. And if you think about that wood product, approximately half of the weight of that wood is carbon. And it's the same with trees out in the forest, that half the dry weight of wood is carbon. And so it's important to remember those two functions when we talk about forests and how to best manage forests for carbon. And so it's kind of like with investments and bonds, we would have two different modes of activity here. We've got the stocks itself, which is kind of our investment, and then the rates, which is kind of the interest on top of that. And if we look at a forest, there's different components of what we would call forest carbon pools, and that is actually where the carbon is stored. Most of that is going to be in the tree trunks and branches, the actual wood, and then also in the soil. Soil is a great carbon storage and carbon sink. When we talk about forest management, a lot of what we are influencing is this above ground carbon, these trunk and branches. And even though soil is very important, we're still trying to unlock how our forest management impacts that. We know preventing erosion is very important. We know having lots of nutritional inputs is important to maintaining soil health. But when we talk about carbon project, it's really the trunk and the branches, that above ground carbon that we are impacting. And forest management is part of a larger set of solutions called natural climate solutions. And this is something that Nature Conservancy and our partners are really promoting as a way to mitigate climate change using nature as our ally. And so there's a lot of attention about technological advances that we can use to suck carbon out of the atmosphere But the reality is we have nature, and there's parts of nature that are really good at doing this, such as forests. And so our scientists have developed lots of different avenues and pathways that we can use, harness the power of nature to address climate change. And forests make up a big component of that. If we look at the potential impact, reforestation is one of the highest ones. So in Western Pennsylvania, that could be surface mine restoration and reforestation. That could be doing some agroforestry as well. But then outside of forest, there's lots of options associated with agriculture, like cover crops, improved manure management. And so lots of different options that through these natural climate solutions. And if we want to focus more on forest carbon management in particular, in general, just some of the recommendations that we have are we want to keep forests healthy and we want to store degraded forests. So keeping forests healthy means keeping them productive, keeping them resilient to pests and other threats. And if a forest is degraded, either from a gypsy moth outbreak or from poor past management, we want to restore those. We want to try to grow back higher quality and productive trees. And so just some of the general forest treatments that we do for sustainable forest management are very compatible with forest carbon management, such as controlling invasive plants or competing vegetation, protecting our regeneration from deer. And both of those components are really important for young forest management, or if we're regenerating a forest, we want those new trees, those young trees, to be able to grow without competition from weeds or competition from deer. And then if there's going to be timber harvesting happening on the forest, we want to make sure that we're minimizing our logging damage so that the trees that are left as residual trees and still standing post-harvest are healthy, their damage is minimized. And then our timber harvest, we want to make sure that they are sustainable. So that means not doing the type of harvest that only removes the productive trees and leaves lower quality trees behind, such as a diameter limit cut, where we would only cut 14 inches and up. That would be an unsustainable harvest that leaves poor quality trees behind. Those lower quality trees are not going to sequester or store as much carbon. So we want to make sure that if we are doing timber harvest, that we are leaving behind a healthy and productive forest. And in general, forest carbon is one of many different goals, many different forest management objectives. And we need to have a holistic approach to forest management to understand that we need to have wildlife considerations and water quality considerations and recreational considerations as well. So in general, how I view forest carbon fitting into this big picture is that we need to manage forest carbon so that we're increasing both sequestration, the act of actually removing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then storage in the tree, in wood products. But how we're doing that, we're making sure it's compatible with landowner management goals. And then through it all, we're always emphasizing plant and wildlife diversity within our forests. So that takes us to the topic of today's conversation, which is the Family Forest Carbon Program. And that is a relationship between the American Forest Foundation and the Nature Conservancy. These are the two organizations that are working together to build this program. The Family Forest Impact Foundation is a subsidiary of American Forest Foundation, and that is actually the organization that signs contracts with landowners, actually administers this program. So you'll see all three of these organizations listed throughout this presentation, and if you end up pursuing one of these Family Forest Carbon Program projects, you'll see these different organizations. So I just wanted to explain quickly the relationship and how these three are interrelated. So the Family Forest Carbon Program is a practice-based approach, and this is a very key part of the program. Carbon projects to date have been project-based approach, where we actually are measuring the carbon out on a specific property and measuring the carbon impact or the benefit of a carbon project on a property by property approach. This approach is practice-based, where we can say if we do a certain forest management practice, then we can measure the carbon benefit.
Your audio cut out a little bit there, Kevin. We're not hearing you right now.
Sorry, my audio cut out. At least on my end, it says it's still working here. So
Yeah,
moving along here.
We hear you. Sorry about that, everybody, but you're coming in clear now, Kevin.
Okay, my apologies. So that practice-based approach is very key to being able to work with smaller landowners, because we can actually take that carbon benefit and apply it on that practice, and then apply that practice over lots of different landowners. So then through also the Family Forest Carbon Program, we are engaging with family forest owners and natural resource professionals, consulting foresters, and we are trying to give them forest management guidance through forest management plans. So again, really trying to incorporate this into a holistic and sustainable approach to forest management. We have multiple benefits of these programs, such as timber production, allowing timber production, timber harvesting. We also enhance wildlife habitat and protect water resources through this program. And one thing that I think is very important to remember and understand about this program is it is built on a financial model with the idea of being scalable across much of the country when we are at full scale. And this is utilizing funding from mostly private sources. So this is not a government regulated program. It is built on a lot of corporations investing in this program with the expectation of being able to generate and sell carbon credits as the long-term funding model for this program. So just want to make that clear. This is not a regulatory carbon market. This is all under what is known as the voluntary carbon market. So why do we look on family-owned forests? And why is that so essential? Well, family forests and private individuals actually own the most forest land in the country. And what we are seeing is that the landowners are not able to participate in carbon projects historically because they're too small. And we see that when we look at the average carbon project size, that even though there's so many family forest owners and landowners that own less than 1,000 acres, much less into the hundreds of acres, most of the carbon projects are really only on 5,000 acres or more. You can see in this graph, hopefully showing up on your screen, that over 90% of the existing forest carbon projects out there are on ownerships of more than 5,000 acres. So that's not going to be compatible, and that's not going to be a mechanism that works if we really want to allow forest carbon projects and forest carbon management to be widely available to all landowners to make a big impact if we're going to use forests to address climate change. If we look at the Central Appalachian region, Virginia, Pennsylvania, we can see that there is a lot of family-owned forests in these areas that would be eligible for this family forest carbon program and historically have not been involved in carbon projects. So we know that there's so much opportunity out there, especially in Western Pennsylvania, Southwestern Pennsylvania. Work with the So I want to dive a little bit more into the details and mechanics of the Family Forest Carbon Program, and also maybe an update on our progress so far. So before I go too far into the detail, I really just want to make it clear that It's a big effort. There's lots of different partners involved in this. As I mentioned, this is on the voluntary market, and so having corporations and private investment is huge. From Amazon and others, we have Forest Service and Natural Resource Conservation Service that are assisting us and having some seed grants and some private foundations as well. And we are also working through Vera to develop the carbon methodology that actually lets us quantify how much carbon is out there. And so this is not just Nature Conservancy and American Forest Foundation saying, here's what we think the carbon numbers are. It's a very rigorous process of how can we measure the carbon and how can we know what the impact is of this project. And I'll go into that into more detail, but just wanted to kind of make you aware of all the different organizations involved with this. And so how it would work is a landowner goes through, there's several different ways, but most of them would go through an online platform called Woods, and you can actually visit that yourself at woodscamp.com. And then after a landowner expresses interest in that program, then they receive a call from a Family Forest Impact Foundation representative just to talk over their goals, what their property is like, some of the management history of the property. If that still seems of interest to a landowner, then they're going to meet with a forester. That forester is going to tour the property, see if the forest looks like it's going to meet our requirements, and I will go through those later as well, and plan a project for you. If that project looks satisfactory and the landowner is still interested in the program, then they would sign a contract and then would start receiving payments for signing up and enrolling in the program. I mentioned .com primary outreach. It's a really neat new online tool that I'm using to recruit landowners. So parcel data is already uploaded into this program. And so when you get on woodscamp.com, you can actually search for your property, pick your parcels, and then it would come back to show you what opportunities are available to you for technical and financial assistance to help you manage your forest land. And Family Forest Carbon programs will be with it. So if a landowner selects Family Forest Carbon Program as one of their opportunities they are interested in, then they can either work with their existing forester if they have a forester they're working with, and if they don't, we can link them with a program forester or another consulting forester to do that visit. Other forms of outreach we are looking at include direct mailing, local media, working with existing landowner groups, working with consulting foresters to plan projects for their existing clients. And then also Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has service foresters that are available in each county. And I just know which the Indiana County Service Forester off the top of my head. I should have looked that up. But if you do a Google search for DCNR foresters, a list pops up. And for anyone that hasn't worked with a service forester, they are a great resource. They are not representing any one project or any one program. They are here to help promote sustainable forest management. And so we want to work with foresters as well. I want to go over some of our practices. There are 2 practices currently that we're launching the Family Forest Carbon Program, and this is what a landowner would actually sign up and agree to enroll into. So the first one is called the Growing Mature Forest Practice, and this is actually a 20-year contract where the landowner agrees to manage their forest in a very specific way that is sustainable and has that forest carbon benefit. And through this, a landowner is going to have two forest management plans, each one being 10 years each. and then they are going to agree to manage their forest in a way that is sustainable and restricts what we call high grading. I mentioned early on that forest carbon management is all about making sure that our forests stay productive. And when you do a timber harvest, you want to make sure you're leaving really good trees behind. And so a high grade is the complete opposite of that. It's when you remove the best trees and you leave low quality ones behind. So we're trying to stop that through this program. And what we say to define that is our average stand diameter not increased by more than 10%. So from pre-post, your average tree diameter should roughly stay the same. And then if there's anyone on the call that kind of knows the more technical side of forestry, we say more than 25% of the basal area may be removed. And basal area is a kind of a forest density measurement that really measures the amount of wood out there. And we can use that to, we show this that we allow some thinnings, but they're going to be pretty low intensity and they're always going to improve quality of forest. So a landowner signs a 20-year contract saying, I will follow these requirements, and the price range on that varies a little bit. It's going to be roughly between $100 and $250 per acre over that 20 years. Just to be clear, that's not $100 to $250 per year. That's the sum total over a 20-year contract. A good bit of that is received up front, and then going forward, a percentage of that amount is provided to the landowner every year. So this practice would be a really good fit for a stand or a forest where you have no plans to do any regeneration harvest, any timber harvest where you would remove the majority of the trees. But there are certain cases where you want to do a timber harvest to regenerate that forest and create habitat for wild, but then also for those very high carbon sequestration forests, so that we can make sure our forests are always being actively growing and productive. In the case to do a regeneration harvest, but we have competing vegetation, such as the photo here, where we have hay-scented fern that's preventing young trees from getting established, or maybe it's an invasive plant like Japanese silkgrass. Vegetation is preventing our young trees or seedlings from getting established and growing, and that's not going to that's not going to lead to a productive or healthy forest with a lot of lead to a very degraded forest that's full of competing vegetation. So we actually want to control these ferns, these invasive plants, to make sure that the harvest is sustainable. When we do that regeneration harvest, that young forest habitat is healthy, productive, and results in lots of carbon sequestration. So this is one where actually the landowner signed a 10-year agreement to make sure that, excuse me, to control the competing vegetation to over those 10 years time. And then it's actually 30 years of carbon benefit that we measure. So it's a 30-year contract, but with 10 years of active management. And the payment for this really depends on the amount of competing vegetation. On the low end, it's about $50 an acre if it's just Japanese stiltgrass along a skid trail or just some spot treatment, where up to $245 an acre if you have some pretty extensive competing vegetation at multiple heights that need to be controlled. So next, I want to go over how we can actually quantify and measure the carbon, because it's very important to not only show what the practices are and sign landowners up, but we also need to document this is how much our impact actually is. How can we actually measure that impact? in general, we see that unsustainable harvesting, unfortunately, is the norm in Pennsylvania and across a lot of the Appalachians. There's definitely opportunities for good harvesting. We are very supportive of sustainable timber management, but the unfortunate reality is there's still a lot of unsustainable harvesting that is going on. And when we compare the timber harvesting allowed through the growing mature forest and the family forest carbon program to what business as usual is, that's sometimes referred to as BAU, your business as usual, we can actually measure what the carbon impact is between those two differences. So here this graph here is actually showing carbon stocks over time. So this would be measured by having a forester go out and measure the amount of wood out in the forest and then translating that into how much carbon there actually is. And we can see that under a sustainable timber harvest regime, we're still doing cutting, but the long-term productivity of the forest is retained and the carbon stocks improve. Compared to multiple unsustainable timber harvesting, we see a long-term decrease in carbon. And then that difference here between the two lines, between the green line and the yellow line, that is what is referred to as additionality. And then if we're talking about carbon credits and carbon offsets, that is what can actually be generated and sold as the carbon impact as a response as a response of the program. And so measuring carbon is pretty easy. We can go out, we do the measurements, we can translate that into carbon. Understanding what this business as usual is, that yellow line, that can be a little tricky, and there's several different ways to do that. And I mentioned we're going through Vera and that's an independent methodology to make sure that when we quantify carbon, we're doing it correctly, we're doing it conservatively, so that we can be very confident in our carbon impact. And the way we do this, at least through Family Forest Carbon Program, is we measure the carbon on the property, we measure other components like forest type, forest stocking, slope, and there's something called forest inventory and analysis, or FIA plots, and they're scattered all across the country, and that's maintained by the U.S. Forest Service, and that's a publicly available database where they summarize the information of these plots. And so how we are going to prove additionality and demonstrate the impact of the Family Forest Carbon Program, we're going to do that by measuring the carbon on the property to those FIA plots. And by doing that, we can see on the Family Forest Carbon Program properties, here's our carbon stocks over time. Compare that to a composite of FIA plots, that would be our business as usual. The difference between that FIA plot composite and the Family Forest Carbon Program projects, that is our additionality, and then that is what can get turned into a carbon credit. So in recap, just some of the differences between the Family Forest Carbon Program and what we've seen as our traditional carbon projects. Again, in a traditional, it's really property-based. What is your carbon on the property? How much is there already? And then in the Family Forest Carbon Program, what is the carbon benefit of that practice-based approach? Those two that I discussed, growing mature forest and enhancing the future forest. That is really the key, is that practice-based approach. In a traditional market, again, we measure on every property. With the practice-based approach, we can just do a subset of those because we actually are relaying the carbon impact, the additionality to the practice rather than individual properties. Now, that said, every property still has a management plan. Landowners submit annual attestations. that they are meeting the terms of the contract. There's remote sensing going on. So we are looking at every property, but the carbon is actually only being measured on a subset of those. And that really reduces the monitoring and measurement costs. Also, the traditional market and the regulated market. So you might have heard of the California Air Resources Board, which is a regulated market. Again, Family Forest Carbon Program is not related to that. This is all voluntary, but the regulatory market has 100-year contracts. Other programs have 40-year contracts. Ours are down to 20-year contracts for that growing mature forest. But when you put all these practices together, we can have a more permanent strategy where we're always signing up new landowners to make sure that we are continuing to have a long-term carbon impact. So as I mentioned early on, this program was launched and started in Pennsylvania. It's the only place in the nation where we're operating right now. And we did 2 areas to kick this off in central Pennsylvania and then also up in north central, northwest part of the state as well. And we signed up landowners in that 16 county area. We tried getting started right about a year ago this time. It was, I think we're like April or so that we really wanted to get started. But then with COVID, we had to shut that down. We want to encourage a forester landowner working interaction here, and just able to do that. So we had to put it on pause. We did pick it up again then over the summer. Had a really busy summer and fall getting landowners signed up for this program. So through this, what we called the learning pilot, which was working in these 2 areas, we tested a lot of different things, seeing how landowners responded to our marketing, got feedback on our contracts, our planning approach. At the same time, we were working with to develop that methodology. Our partners at American Forest Foundation were building out the financial pilot, working with investors to see what was the market demand for the credits that we were generating, how were we looking as far as income and expenses, because again, this isn't a grant-funded program. This is something that is built on a financial model. We need to make sure that we are operating within that financial model if we're going to make this work. And then also looking at other practices as well. I know there's interest in a reforestation practice, such as for tree planting. We're looking at practice that's actually called reduced impact logging and is associated with sustainable timber harvesting and the carbon benefit associated with that harvest as well. So we hope to build those in the future. As I mentioned, we had a really busy summer and fall. Really saw really good interest once this program kind of got kicked up and moving. The qualified column on the left, that is landowners that came into that Woods Camp program that I mentioned. Landowners have expressed interest in this. Of those, had 110 site visits completed where a forester and a landowner met and planned a project. We talked about the forest program as well as with management goals and objectives as well. We had 60 contracts to landowners. Most of that gap there between visits completed and contracts sent is just taking the time to get inventory data together. So we definitely expect to see this number continue to climb, as well as the landowners enrolled. Once we send the contracts to them, they need time to review that contract, talk to other folks involved in the property, other family members, make sure that is something that they're interested in. But as of now, we're at 43 contracts signed. I think it's actually a little bit higher than that right now, and we're over 6,000 acre mark. We did kind of slow down our outreach and our site visits at the beginning of 2021, since we were wrapping up that learning pilot in that small geography, we wanted to just look at our results, see what we needed to fix, and we have been making a few changes to the program to make sure we're still operating within that financial model, making sure that we're being efficient and effective in our work. So yeah, the last 2 months here, January and February, we have seen a little bit of a slowdown, but definitely expect to tick back up then this spring. We're going to be expanding to new areas here pretty soon. I unfortunately don't have a definite timeline for moving into Indiana County. You know, a conservative estimate now is still 6 to 12 months away. It could definitely be sooner than that, but I think that's probably our best bet right now. I know we are going to be moving into counties in Southwest Pennsylvania. If anyone would happen to be listening to this from Bedford, Somerset area, I know that's on our radar as well. But yeah, we will definitely be in Indiana County some point within the next year. So just wanted to wrap up this program and just end on the take-home message of why this program is so important and really what sets it apart from other carbon projects. It's science-based. The practices are high-quality practices. The FIA measurement approach that we're using is really innovative, and I think a great way to really prove the carbon impact of this program. And again, this program is efficient, it's scalable. We want to work over a very large area. We're actually already talking to people in New England and around the Great Lakes and southeast part of the country starting up the program there as well. And then again, plans to move statewide throughout Pennsylvania into Maryland and West Virginia as well over the next year. And most importantly, relevant to small parcels, to the family forest. And as I mentioned in some of those earlier slides, that is, as a collection, that's the largest forest landowner in the nation. We need to find ways to work with them. And then also multiple benefits to people and nature. And I just want to drive home that that is such an important part of forest carbon management. There's so many different variables we need to consider. Again, wildlife, forest health, timber products. Forest carbon is one component of that, and we've been trying to build this program so that it is compatible with the multiple goals that landowners have. So with that, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Thank you for your patience with the internet and audio issues. I will take some questions if you have any, but thank you and everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Kevin. You did a great job adapting to that internet difficulty. So, we really appreciate your time. We'll be watching the chat. If anyone wants to type out a question, you also can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you would like to ask it. I'm going to start off by saying, Kevin, I know last year over the summer, especially in the southern part of the county, and I think there was a lot of damage up north too, we had some people who were interested in this program, but they were concerned that they would no longer qualify for it because so many of their trees have been taken out by a microburst we suffered. So, do you have any comments on how this program could potentially be used to build that forest back up? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's there's two things I want to discuss here. One is what happens if you're already contracted and you get those microbursts or a forest pest outbreak like gypsy moth. So that is actually what is termed an unintentional reversal, where the landowner did nothing wrong, but from an act of nature, we had a loss of carbon stocks. landowners are not penalized for those unintentional reversals. And that's Family Forest Carbon Program. That's pretty standard across all carbon projects. If a landowner would do an intentional reversal, such as do a timber harvest that would not be within the bounds of the program, then there is a penalty for that. But something where you did nothing wrong, you had that forest pest outbreak, there's no wrong done, and the program actually has a buffer already established that helps cover those impacts. And if that's already happened, if you've already had that wind damage or the forest pest outbreak, depending how extreme that was and how severe, that enhancing the future forest might be a consideration, because we know that if forests are really degraded, weather, wind throw, or really gypsy moth is a really good example of this too. If you have a really major outbreak, you actually sometimes the best thing for the forest is to regenerate that forest, get new growth coming back, get those young trees to replace those ones that were damaged. And if there's competing vegetation, then the enhancing the future forest would be a really good opportunity there.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Do you think the amount paid to forest owners will increase if the price of carbon credits increases?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's one that everyone kind of asks, when's the right time to get into this market? We definitely hope and expect that the price of carbon will go up. If it goes up significantly, then that would mean higher payment rates to the landowners. And I'm pretty sure our contract does have a clause in there that kind of like an escalation clause, that the price of carbon goes up and our financial model changes so that there's extra income coming of that price climb, then that would make it to the landowner too. I don't know, is that tiered? Is that going to happen immediately if the price goes from $11 a credit to $12 a credit? I don't know that, but we definitely do understand that concern. We anticipate an increase. We do have that in the contract, so that would benefit the landowner.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. So, and you cut out just a tiny bit, but just to recap, there is something in the contract that says that if the price of carbon increases, someone who's already in a contract would see an increase in the amount they're paid. We don't know necessarily how much, but there would be a change. Kevin?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So our next question in the Q&A is, someone lives in the Pittsburgh area, but they own land, only about 20 plus acres of woods. What plans, if any, are there for this area? And that's in Medina County, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah, we plan to get out to Ohio eventually. I don't have a timeline for that. At 20 acres right now, that is actually below our eligibility threshold. Right now, our minimum acreage is 30 acres for the growing mature forest practice. It is actually 20 acres for the enhancing future forest if you want to do a regeneration harvest. Again, that could change if the price of carbon goes up, as we discussed earlier. Then we could work with smaller landowners. So in summary, I would say right now, we're kind of in a wait and see approach for 20 acres, and then same for Ohio. So we hope to be able to work with you someday, but unfortunately, I don't have that timeline when that might be.
Okay. Our next question is, how does this program interface with the CREP program?
Yes, that would be a Natural Resource Conservation Service and Farm Service Agency administered program. So at least in my experience, that program, CREP, is usually in grasslands, or you might have a riparian, and that's not going to be really the type of forest land that we are working with Family Forest Carbon Program. Programs such as the EQIP program through NRCS, and also the Conservation Stewardship Program. Certain practices there are compatible. So in general, we are
Could you repeat that, Kevin? You cut out a little bit.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
NRCS and Family Forest Carbon Program are compatible, and to work with your local NRCS staff to understand exactly what practices would be available and compatible with Family Forest Carbon Program. We've provided that. We are providing that guidance to NRCS staff, and so for your specific contract, you should work with NRCS, see how those two would be compatible.
Okay, that's excellent to know that people who are maybe taking advantage of other programs for different types of land are able to partner that arrangement with yours. So the next question is, what technically constitutes a forest land?
That's a really good question. We have adopted the forest inventory analysis definition, which is more than 10% canopy cover on more than 1 acre. So a pasture with some scattered trees is not going to be forest land. A fence row is not going to be forest land. But if you have a small woodlot, 2 acre size, with more than 10% canopy cover, then that would count as forest land.
All right, so we have 2 questions from our Facebook Live. I'm going to start with Darlene May. Could Kevin address the clause that requires forest owners to pay back money they've received, and how much must be returned?
Yes, so I mentioned earlier an intentional reversal, and that is where the landowner willingly and knowingly makes a decision to break the terms of the contract. And in that situation, they need to pay back all the money they received plus a fee. That fee, I don't know exactly, it's around 25%. And the reason for that is to recoup all the staff time and money that was invested in that program. Because when there's that intentional reversal, we do have carbon fit, we cannot create credits from that reversal. And then, as I mentioned, this is built on a financial model. So it is a serious contract that has those clauses in there that says what would happen if you stick with terms of the contract over those 4 years. In general, that is all the money back plus 25% fee, or it's roughly 25% around there.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question is, the property. How would this be affected if property was enrolled in the Clean and Green program?
So this has no, Clean and Green has no impact on this program. They would be definitely compatible. And same would go with a landowner that has a conservation needs still allows timber harvesting, that would be compatible as well. If a landowner would be would have any prohibition against timber harvesting on their property, if timber harvest is not allowed at all, they would be ineligible. My understanding is that is not clean and green. Clean and green, it does allow for timber harvesting. So those clean and green and family forest carbon program are definitely compatible.
Incompatible, you say?
No, they are compatible.
They are compatible. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
No, it's all right.
Yes.
It's all right. And just to summarize, so clean and green allows for timbering to occur, and this program does not allow for timbering to occur. But could they do both programs at once, or I guess not if they are intending to do the timbering.
No, I'm sorry. I'll repeat myself there.
Sorry.
This program, to be eligible for Family Forest Carbon Program, you have to be allowed to do a timber harvest on the property. That doesn't mean that you have to do a timber harvest. You just have to be allowed to do a timber harvest. Clean and green allows for timber harvesting. Therefore, a landowner in clean and green would be eligible for a Family Forest Carbon Program. If a landowner has a conservation easement or other enforcement or designation that would say there is no timber harvesting on this property, then actually that landowner is ineligible for a Family Forest Carbon Program because there would not be any additionality as a result of a carbon project.
Okay. All right. I think we might have answered all of the questions that were in the chat or in the Q&A. If anyone has any burning questions, but they're a slow typer, just go ahead and pound some letters into one of them, and we'll wait for you. But these have been some excellent questions, and you've done an excellent job in explaining this program to us, Kevin. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me again. Sincere apologies. I'm very sorry for the internet issues. Hopefully enough information came through that people are interested. And if you do want to learn more about the program, the .org is the best resource to learn more about the program. You can also sign up for updates, including when we'll be in the by visiting that website and signing up. So for landowners that want to learn more, please visit familyforestcarbon.org.
Right, thank you. And if you would like, Kevin, just to have your links and website as available as possible, I've put in the chat our webpage for this summit, which is the sustainableindianacounty.org/events or /events/summit. If you go to that page, you can see all the webinars that we are having. If you aren't able to hang on for the survey, a survey about this particular webinar will be available through the weekend. And Kevin, if you'd like, we can put some of the information and links that relevant to your program in your webinar description. Though I do believe we've received some from your organization already.
Great.
All right.
Great.
Yep. I think we are done with questions. So thank you everyone for your time. I'm just scrolling through the Facebook. It looks like we've received all of our questions. We really appreciate everyone tuning in, and we hope that this webinar was informative for you. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.